This tutorial is for 5th grade, Module 1, Lesson 7. In this lesson, we're going to use a vertical number line to help us round decimals. Question 1 says use the vertical number line to find the midpoint and round each number. The first part of the question says 3 1/10 is found between the whole numbers of, and we're given the choices 1 and 2, 2 and 3, or 3 and 4. Well, if we think about the number 3 1/10, it's a little past 3, and it's not quite yet to 4. So the two whole numbers that this number is found between would be 3 and 4. I'm going to take those numbers and put them on the vertical number line. I'll put the smaller number at the bottom. So we'll put the 3 here, and then the 4 at the top. And go back to my question. The next part says the midpoint between these two numbers is, and my choices are 2 5/10, 3 5/10, or 4 5/10. Well, the midpoint is the halfway mark between 3 and 4, which would be 3 1/2, or another way to say that would be 3 5/10. So the midpoint would be 3 5/10. So I'll put that on the number line as well. The next step is to plot 3 1/10 on the number line. So 3 1/10 is going to be past 3, but it's still going to be under 3 5/10. So I'm just going to approximately place 3 1/10 on that number line. Now my choices for rounding would be either 3 or 4, since we're rounding this number to the nearest whole number. Since 3 1/10 is less than 3 5/10, then I know that it will round to the whole number of 3. So that midpoint helps us decide which way to round. If the number hasn't quite reached the midpoint, it's going to round down. If the number is at the midpoint or above, it will round up. Let's look at another example. This time we're going to round the number 3 12/100 to the nearest tenth. The first part of the question asks 3 12/100 is found between the tenths of 3 1/10 and 3 2/10, 3 2/10 and 3 3/10, or 3 3/10 and 3 4/10. Well, it's a little past 3 1/10, but it's not quite to 3 2/10. So we'll say that it is going to be found between 3 1/10 and 3 2/10. I'm going to take those two numbers and put them on the number line. So the smaller number goes on bottom, so we have 3 1/10, and the larger number on top, 3 2/10. Now we need to find the midpoint between 3 1/10 and 3 2/10. Well, halfway between them would be 3 1/10 and 5/100. So anytime we're looking for the midpoint, we're really looking for that 5 in the next place value to the right. So this would be my midpoint. So we'll put that on the number line. So you can see the pattern here. The 3 is the whole number. The 1 is in the tenths place. And then the 5 would be the midpoint, the 5 in the place value to the right. The next step is to place our original number, 3 12/100, onto the number line. So the midpoint is 3 15/100, so 3 12/100 would be below that. So we'll just make an approximate guess here, plot it, and then the question is 3 12/100 closer to 3 1/10 or 3 2/10? Since it's below the midpoint, it's closer to 3 1/10. So when we round it, 3 12/100 rounds to the nearest tenth of 3 1/10. In this next question, we're going to round 0 864 thousandths to the nearest hundredth. The first part of the question says 0 and 864 is found between the hundredths of, and these are our number choices. So if I look at the original number, it has 86 hundredths. So it's a little bit past 86 hundredths, but it's not quite up to 87 hundredths. So it would be found between 86 hundredths and 87 hundredths. We'll put those two numbers on the number line, the smaller number at the bottom and the larger number at the top. And again, we need to find the midpoint between those two numbers. So we're between 86 hundredths and 87 hundredths. And we know we're going to just look for that 5 in the next place value over, which would be the thousandths place. So we can see that this would be our midpoint. We have 86 hundredths and another 5 thousandths to show the midpoint. So we'll write that on the number line. And now we just need to place 0 and 864 thousandths onto the number line. So let's see, the midpoint is 0 and 865 thousandths, so that's going to be just below that. And again, since our number is below the midpoint, it will round down. That means 0 and 864 thousandths rounded to the nearest hundredth is 0 and 86 hundredths. The key to rounding these decimals is to figure out what two numbers the decimal is in between and figure out the midpoint and then decide if you're closer to the larger number or the smaller number.